Hello, online folks. How are you this evening? So good to see all of you. We have 21 people with us on Zoom. That's probably our biggest simulcast Zoom attendance that we've had so far. So for you all who are with us on Zoom, oh my goodness, I don't know. Let me see about how many people have. 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got about 55-ish people because we have some people over there in the other plant swap room. So pretty good meeting attendance altogether. We're up there around the 70s, so that's wonderful. So good to see all of you. And I want to recognize again, we have a lot of new-ish members with us here tonight. So if you were in the training class this spring, or this fall, or even last fall, well, I still consider you all new. We all stand up so we can identify you. Yay! 8. We have 8 new folks here, people. Good. So, okay. So I'm trying to think of announcements. Jason isn't with us tonight. He had to go to Indianapolis to do a talk up there with some of his friends, some of his horticulture friends. And he asked if I would relay some messages about the amaryllis sale. So for those who aren't aware, last year we had an amaryllis bulb sale, and it was only available to people who were friends of the garden. But this year it's open to the general public. But I believe Friends of the Garden get to shop first. So there's going to be like a specific, first day of the sale. So if you've paid I think it's like a $25 membership fee to be a friend of the garden, you will get to do some things like this, some special plant sales. You get your own edition of the magazine called Cultivate. We have 2 issues each year, a spring issue and a fall issue. You get a discount on admissions to botanic gardens across the United States. So lots of benefits that come along with the Friends of the Garden membership. So if you're interested in the amaryllis sale, he said that they have landed in Richmond, Virginia. They're on they're on land, not in a ship. And so they're going to get here for sure. The sale is probably going to be, he said wasn't for sure, but like 15th, 16th, 17th, somewhere around those dates. If you want to know the cultivars that will be available, the list is on the UT Gardens Jackson Facebook page. So you can go on there and browse through there. Go ahead and be picking out the ones that you want. And there will be, he said, approximately 800 bulbs. And so they are so much fun. And they make great Christmas gifts. I gave them to people that don't even particularly like plants, and they were just overjoyed with them, right? They were just excited about, because they didn't have to do anything, right? They like to be in a little bitty pot. You just set them there and they do their thing, and in a few weeks they bloom. And so it was really rewarding for those folks. So be sure to check that out. Trying to think if we have any other kind of updates like that. This is our last meeting of the year, so we need to have elections. And I'm going to turn the lights down so that y'all can see. I'm going to put the slate that our nominating committee came up with. I'm going to put that up here on the screen so that everybody can see it, okay? Okay. Also, if you hear a strange, quiet beeping sound, that is the light system. I can't figure it out. Whenever you dim the lights, it begins to beep. So just every once in a while, it goes beep. So don't think you're going crazy if you hear it, because I did before y'all got here. Okay. Oh, no. Okay, so people who are online, hopefully I've shared my screen and hopefully you are looking at the MCMG election slate for 2022. So for those of you who are new to the association, the way that our elections work is we have a nominating committee. We identify the positions that are up for filling. They recruit people. So we've been looking for folks for the past several months who may be interested in filling those positions, and we get an okay from them if they're going to accept a nomination for that spot. Then we put together this slate, and then we ask you all, well, then we ask for nominations from the floor. So if you have nominations for the floor for any of these positions, we're going to do it in a minute, and that will be the time to make your nominations. If there are no nominations from the floor, we as a membership vote to accept the entire slate as proposed by the nomination committee. Does that make sense? And we just do that by hand vote. If we do have nominations from the floor, that's fine. I have all the materials that we need to do handwritten votes from that point, okay? So I will walk us through this. Charlotte, do you want me to do it or do you want to do it? Okay. Let's see. Where's my? Okay. Okay. So we're just going to start at the beginning. So the position of president is currently held by Ms. Charlotte Jacquet. Jacquet. I'm still trying to get that one right. She's been doing a wonderful job, and she has accepted a nomination to do a second one-year term. So you can serve in the position of president for 2 consecutive one-year terms. And she has accepted a nomination for that position once again for 2022. The position of First Vice President of Programs is currently held by Ms. Nancy Blair, and she has also accepted a nomination to fulfill a second one-year term. And then a position that we had to fill with a new member is the position of Second Vice President of Projects. That has been held by Manuel McKnight, but he has served 2 consecutive one-year terms already. So at that point, he wasn't eligible to fulfill that position anymore. And the nomination committee has approached Ms. Mona Miller, and she has accepted a nomination to fill this position. So she will have the potential to serve 2 one-year terms in that position. The position of secretary is currently held by Ms. Laura Tomlin, and that actually has it's an unlimited term. So as long as the person who's in that position wants to continue doing that, they can, and she has accepted a nomination to continue in that role for a second year. And then our current treasurer is also an unlimited term, I guess you'll say. And Miss Mary Nanarella has been doing that for us, and she has agreed to fulfill that position for a 3rd year. So those are the only positions that actually require a vote, and we'll approach those here in a minute. But before we get there, I do want to acknowledge the rest of our board members, and all of these folks. We don't have any actions required for their positions this year. So no renominations, no new nominations. Donald Collump, in 2020, he will be doing his 2nd year of his first 2-year term. If you're just a general board member, you can do 2 consecutive terms, and the terms are 2 years long. Whereas for positions like president, vice president, those are 1-year terms, okay? Stephen Pope is, in 2022, will be in his 2nd year of his 2nd 2-year term. Miss Marie Kuiper, this coming year, will be in her 2nd year of a 2-year term. And Mr. Philip Mullins will be in his second year of his first 2-year term. So we don't require any elections for the general board members there. So we're gonna start with addressing the executive committee up top, okay? So now I'm gonna ask for nominations from the floor for each of these positions, okay? Do we have any nominations from the floor for the position of president? Any nominations from the virtual floor? Folks who are with us on Zoom? Okay. All right, no nominations from the floor for president. Do we have any nominations from the floor for the position of first vice president of programs? Virtual? Okay, hearing none, we will accept that position on the slate. Any nominations from the floor for second vice president of projects for 2022? Virtually? Okay, no nominations from the floor. Secretary, do we have any nominations from the floor for secretary? No. All right. And finally, treasurer. Do we have any nominations from the floor for treasurer? Okay. So having no nominations from the floor, I'm now going to present y'all with the slate as presented by our nominating committee, where our president will be Ms. Charlotte Jacquette. Our first vice president would be Nancy Blair. Our second vice president would be Mona Miller, secretary Laura Tomlin, and treasurer Mary Nanarella. So all who are in favor of this presented slate, raise your hand. Good. Okay. All who are opposed? And we have no opposition, and the slate is approved. If I had a gavel, I would bang it or something. Good. Okay, great. So looking forward to, yes, ma'am, Miss Darling. Yes, let's do that. So most of these people are with us. Miss Charlotte, will you stand up so everybody can see you? Miss Charlotte's our president. And Nancy Blair. She's vice president of programs. Mona Miller, I don't think she could make it tonight. Miss Mona is not with us tonight. Ma'am? She's not with us virtually either. I think she was out of town. I can't remember. Secretary, Miss Laura Tomlin. There's Miss Laura. And Miss Mary Nanarella, our treasurer. There we go. And let's also recognize our board members in case you weren't familiar with those names that I mentioned in their faces. Donald Collump and Stephen Pope and Philip Mullins are all here with us tonight. So this is Donald. And this is Mr. Stephen. And where's Philip at? He's here somewhere. I bet he's in the plant room. Yeah, and so we'll recognize those folks again when we have the whole group here with us in January. Good. Thank you all for making that like so easy and simple. Elections are always a little daunting. Want to make sure you get them done right. Let me fix our screen here. Okay, so we've got elections done. I did want to make an announcement about some things that the board decided tonight. You know, we like to keep our funds down to a manageable level, you know, because we are nonprofit, and so there's no sense in having a lot of money floating around everywhere. And we want to put our money towards things that are meaningful in the community and related to horticulture. And so the board voted tonight to donate $5,000 towards the building fund of the garden pavilion that is going to be built here at the UT Gardens Jackson in the future. We don't know exactly when that's going to happen. They're doing fundraising efforts and building those funds so that we can have a really nice education pavilion. It's going to be huge. It'll seat like 300 people under a covered roof. We're going to be able to do education programs, host events out there, use it for all different kinds of activities in the garden. Yes, ma'am.
Where exactly? Location.
Good. So Ms. Barbara asked, where is it going to be? So it's going to be as you're coming down the drive, you'll pass the bottle wall, and then there's what we call the turf wheel, and it'll be right past the turf wheel in that open space. So where they usually have the big vendor tent when we have summer celebration, that'll be the general location for it. And there's several phases planned, so hopefully we'll be able to see that develop over the years. There's planned to have restrooms in the back of the facility, so bathrooms out in the garden, that would be nice. We'll have electricity, there'll be fans, we'll be able to have screens out there and internet and be able to do a lot of cool things out there. And then also they voted to donate $2,000 to the UT Gardens Jackson for Jason to put towards infrastructure and projects that are ongoing. Like right now they're renovating the Mediterranean garden where the bananas used to be. You know what I'm talking about? That big bed where all those bananas and the flagpole were. So donated some funds towards him so that they can continue improving things on the grounds right now. Okay, does anybody have any questions about any of that stuff? No? Okay. Does anybody else have any announcements? I feel like we're heavy on the me talking tonight. You want to come up and tell everybody about and recruit? Yes, please.
Okay, so we had a cleanup for Liberty Park this past Tuesday, November 2nd. We did it in conjunction with the Union University students. This is their community day. They do it every year. They've done it for the past 9 years, I think, since their tornado. And they've one of our partners with the whole Liberty Park thing. So they come out there. We had the Master Gardeners there as well. Between the Union University students and the Master Gardeners, we had about 24, 25 people. We got a lot done. We got a bunch of bulbs planted and mulched and trimmed leaves and picked up and lower limbs cut and suckers cut. And so we got a lot done. There's still more to do, but I appreciate all the help we had all year. We had some people go out there a couple weeks prior that had the time and weeded some of the beds. So we didn't have to do a lot of weeding when we did the mulch. So it was great.
Nice, awesome. And if you ever want some hours of things that you can just do on your own, like a real flexible schedule, you can holler at Jack and he will tell you what areas need some attention. And so, you know, we love having group project work days where we all come together and work together and, you know, get to be with each other and get to know one another. But if that doesn't fit your schedule and you would still like to contribute to that garden, for sure, know that you can definitely do that. And he's happy to let you know what areas we need. Yes, sir.
That was the same time as your church conference video.
I'm trying to think which one that was. The the Tennessee Smart Yards. Oh yes, okay, so we did have the Tennessee Smart Yards program Tuesday morning. Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. So we've been emailing those reminders to you all. Who gets the statewide newsletter, the TEMG statewide newsletter? I mean, the majority of you should be getting it, okay? And for the past 2 months, I've been forwarding it on to everyone anyway, regardless of if I think you got it or not. And so for the month of November, we are featuring for Master Gardeners as a volunteer development education program, an opportunity to get involved with the Tennessee Smart Yards program. So if you have attended any of our Friday focus sessions that we have throughout the year that are just for Master Gardeners, those are on Zoom, or if you've attended the Thursday horticulture topics, which are Zoom sessions offered statewide, but they're open to the general public, you have heard about Tennessee Smart Yards. And we also had Dr. Andrea Ludwig came this past year and did a presentation for us. She was one of our monthly meeting speakers on the program. And so each Tuesday in November at 9 o'clock, we are hosting this volunteer development program. The first one was this past Tuesday. It has been recorded, and I spoke to Natalie Baumgardner, our director. She texted me at about 3 and said that she was editing the video. So everybody's going to get she always kind of sends out a follow-up email with a link to the recording, and we asked everybody to do some homework. We wanted y'all to review a document that we are going to use in our group discussions this coming Tuesday. So if you're interested in learning more about that, we are promoting Tennessee Smart Yards to Master Gardeners and encouraging you to seek out the program, get certified. Y'all, it's so easy, especially for Master Gardeners, because we're already doing so many of the practices. So all it takes is a little bit of education on the front end. There are 9 modules. They last about 30 minutes a piece. I challenged everyone who's participating in the development series to watch 2 videos a week. And by the end of it, they'll be more than halfway done. And then when you go down through the yardstick to see what actions you implement in your lawn to accumulate 36 inches. Oh, will you hold up the yardstick? Nancy's got the material right here. So there's our yardstick, and there are actions for every module. And I'm telling y'all, I went through here and added up things that I was already doing in my yard. I already have like 28 or 30 inches. So only needed to institute 6 new inches worth of practices to have a certified Tennessee Smart Yard. So anyway, it's just a fun thing to do. You can count the education towards your continuing education service for Master Gardeners. And we are going to have a service component that ties in with that, but I don't want to give it away yet because we're going to introduce that on our last session. So join us on Tuesdays in November. We only have 2 more left because we did the first one this week. So just look in your inboxes for the links to that. It'll be a fun thing. And I'm trying to think, anybody else have any more questions? Yes, ma'am.
I've got another announcement.
Oh, good. Come on. Another announcement.
Is this about the right?
Yeah, get a little closer.
Okay. Madison County is having its 200th anniversary. Well, Henderson County is also having a 200th anniversary. And this Saturday at Parker's Crossroads on the interstate, across the road from the National Veterans Cemetery, which is beautiful and brand new, we are creating an herb garden with all kinds of medicinal herbs. It's going to be a project that any of you can participate in. And I'll be announcing in the spring so that any of you can participate perhaps at your own time. But at 9 o'clock, there will be a registration. And what you will do, you will go through about 5 different little mini seminars. And they'll have how to cure hams. There will be something on muzzle loaders and what happened way back in the Civil War. There is an expo of quilts, And there is a 2-mile and a 1-mile walking trail. And so if you get bored with any of that, you can walk the trail. The visitor center up at the main housing on the as you get off the interstate has all kinds of memorabilia, books, all kinds of things that you can purchase. But there's going to be all kinds of opportunities for any of you to participate. So if you don't, I know there's lots of stuff going on this weekend, but if you are interested in history, or your children are, the Boy Scouts are going to be helping. I'm helping to register and do the quilts. We're getting the medicinal garden ready for all of you to start working in it. In other words, I got tired of carrying buckets of water, and now we're doing underground watering so that we can actually keep our plants alive. So hope you can come Saturday morning, 9 o'clock. If you look for the visitor center, you can be directed from there. And it's a lot of fun, and I think you would enjoy it. Thanks.
Thank you. And it will be a lot of fun, y'all. I used to work over there in Parker's Crossroads and spent a lot of time out there at the park. And my kids, I still take my kids, their walking trails are wonderful. They can bring their bikes. It goes through open fields, and then it goes through a big wooded area. And it's just really beautiful. And I think I'm glad that we are partnering with them and getting this garden started. You know, they've been inviting us for the past several years to participate in their park days when they have park cleanups. And so glad to get that partnership going. So that'll be a fun thing to do. All right, does anybody else have project updates? New projects? Yes, sir.
Not mine. I don't think Carol Henry's here. Planners, downtown planners.
Yes, Downtown Planners project is this Saturday. They are meeting at 9 o'clock at that public parking lot that's off of North Highland. It's like directly across from like Grubbs. So kind of think that area. If you're not familiar, I can't remember all those road names, but that's generally where they congregate. And I looked on the signups yesterday, and they had about 12 people signed up, but we can always use more help, and that's a fun way to get involved too. Yes, yes, ma'am, Ms. Barbara.
That's on the corner of College Street and
College and Highland, I know you would know. Thank you. We had somebody in the back. Yes, Miss Lee. Oh yeah, Miss Lee. Okay, so update on the RIFA arrangements and the Helping Hand arrangements. I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to enter in the sign-up dates in our sign-up for the next 6 months. And we're pulling back the RIFA arrangements from 2 a week to 1 a week, back to Monday, how we, traditionally did it before COVID. And I feel like there was something else I'm leaving out about that information. Did I get it all, Ms. Lee? Okay, yes, good, okay. All right, and if you sign up, like if you do that RIFA project a lot, like, over and over and over and over, Ms. Lee can set you up with a set of vases so that y'all don't have to do a lot of traveling back and forth. Okay, I love this. I love having everybody come up and do their announcements and tell about their projects. We're definitely going to start doing that again when we get back on track in 2022. Oh, and hopefully we'll start doing food again too in January. So let's just stay tuned. I know, yay! So let's stay tuned for that, and it'll be here before we know it, y'all. I love that we take off the month of December because things get so busy, but still going 2 months without seeing all y'all sometimes feels like a really long time. But we're going to enjoy all the things that we'll be able to do in our time off. Okay, so let me move this thing right here, this tripod. I don't like the light shining on the screen like that. Track lights. That makes it better, doesn't it? I had to turn the track lights off. Oh no, my computer's dying. Let me get my charger. I didn't feel like there was enough cords involved when I hooked everything up. There we go. Aha, and voila, we have power. Okay, so before we get to our seed and plant swap, if you brought seeds and plants, raise your hand. I just want to be real proud of y'all and gloat for a minute. Look at all the stuff, all the people who brought stuff. Yay, I'm so excited. So when we get ready to do that, we don't really have like a plan. Just be courteous, and if there's two of something, only get one of them so someone else can enjoy the other one. You see what I'm getting at? I'm pretty sure. So that will be fun. But before we get to that, Miss Nancy asked if I would do a little presentation on seed collection. And I have done a presentation on seed collection a few times this fall already to different groups in different areas of West Tennessee, and had a lot of fun with it. But for tonight, I decided to take a little different angle on it. So let me get that PowerPoint pulled up, and I promise to try not to go on and on. We'll keep it to about 15 minutes so we can get to the fun stuff. From the beginning. Here we go. Two. Okay, so folks who are online should be seeing the screen. It says seed saving, storage, and dormancy. And I also saw when I was trying to fix all that stuff up that there were some questions in the chat box. I will try to get to the chat box at the end, okay? It also says I have low quality performance, so that's never promising when you're trying to get started with the presentation. I'm almost positive they mean internet, so hopefully, no, it was a computer automated message, yeah, so good. Let me move this little video icon out of the way so I can see things. Okay, good. Okay, so basically, I just couldn't, I have been evolving this talk each time I gave it. It was never the same. But for you all, I know that several of you have seen those talks already. I did it one time for our Gardener's Tool Shed session, and I did it again at the Veterans Museum in Covington, and then I have also done it for a local garden club association. So I know that some of you had seen that, and so I just wanted to change it up a little bit. And in that original presentation, which you can still view, by the way, if you'd like to go back and see any of the recorded Gardener's Tool Shed series, they're on our website, MadisonCountyMG.org. Okay, so you can go back, view them there, and of course count those for education if you would like. But that program focuses mainly on identifying structures of different flowers and where to find the seed and what they look like, and then how to separate those seeds from the chaff. So we spend a lot of time going over individual types of flowers. I've got some really great pictures in those programs about what those seeds look like, because believe it or not, it can be a bit daunting to people if you're new to seed collection, trying to identify what part of that plant is the actual seed, what's important to save and what is not. But in this discussion today, I decided to take a little different approach. if I can get it to advance here. There we go. So in my regular talk, we talk about where to find those seeds. We talk about harvesting them when those seed pods are at full maturity. It's important, obviously, to harvest during dry conditions and conditions of low humidity. So that's really what I focused that original talk on. But today we're going to delve in a little deeper. We're going to talk about understanding pollination, understanding hybridization, and what role that plays in seed collection, okay? You guys are master gardeners. We're kicking it up a notch. Yeah, you know where to find seeds at. You don't need me to tell you where the seeds are, but just in case you do, I have a diagram. So here is, the flower picture that most of you see when, well, I say most of you, when you're probably in high school and had botany class. We talk about the different parts of the flower, and this is very important when we're talking about pollination and trying to understand all of the interactions that are involved with this. So let's just kind of do a quick refresher in our head. Let me turn on my pointer so that y'all can see what I'm pointing at on the screen. I think I turned it on. Laser pointer. Yes, please. So let's refresh ourselves about the female parts of the flower, not farts. Okay. So this is what we call the stigma right here at the very top. It's the sticky part that collects the pollen. This long section here is called the style, and at the base of that style is the ovary. And if a flower is properly pollinated, that ovule begins to develop and turns into the seed, right? Or the fruit that contains the seed. And so we spend a lot of time in that other program talking about that and how to identify that in different flower structures. But before we move on, let's talk about the male parts of the flower, which are equally important. So the portion right up here that holds the pollen is called the anther, and then it's held by a filament. The important thing to know is we have male parts of the flower and we have female parts of the flower, and those sometimes are born in the same flower. Sometimes they're born on separate flowers. Sometimes they're born on separate plants, and that all plays a role in the formation or the science of pollination, I guess we'll say. So if we think about this in terms of seed saving is essentially a form of selection, right? So think about plant breeders, they're selecting for traits and qualities that they like. That is what we as seed savers are doing. It's basically a form of selection, and it is just that very most basic part of plant breeding. So when we're choosing plants to save seed from, a gardener can decide which plants have the most desirable characteristics. That could be plant height, fruit size, fruit yield, bloom color, et cetera, because crossing is happening in the garden whether we know it is or not, unless we control it. And so that's what we're going to talk about right now. So when we talk about plants that are self-pollinated plants have flowers with both male and female parts in the flower. Those are called perfect flowers. Okay, and typically they have flower structures that prevent the introduction of pollen from other plants in their environment. That doesn't mean that they can't get pollinated in other fashions. That doesn't mean an insect might not get in there and pollinate it. That doesn't mean pollen from another plant is never going to touch this particular plant. It just means the main method of pollination that nature intended for that plant, those structures are held inside that flower. So some examples are plants that are in the Solanaceae family. Think of a tomato bloom, how it's bell-shaped, begins kind of like this and then ends up hanging down this way. Peppers, eggplants, other self-pollinated plants, legumes like our beans and our peas, and then several composite type plants that are in the Compositae family, like lettuce and endives and radicchios. Those are all plants that are meant to be self-pollinated, okay? So have you ever seen, but again, That doesn't mean they can't be pollinated other ways. Have you ever seen a bee on a tomato bloom? I'm sure you have. And so there is a possibility that pollen could be transferred from a different tomato cultivar to another one. Does that make sense? If you're growing more than 2 tomato cultivars, there is a possibility that they could inadvertently get self-pollinated. But that plant in and of itself is created so that self-pollination could happen, even if there wasn't another one present. Does that make sense? Everybody on board? Okay, good. So now let's compare that to plants that were constructed for cross-pollination, okay? Cross-pollinating crops. They have different mechanisms that encourage pollination by other plants, okay? And it could be plants of the same species, or it could be the potential of an outcrossing through closely related species. So let's think of plants that are what we call monoecious, okay? So monoecious plants have separate male and female flowers on the same plant. And an excellent example of that are plants that are in the cucurbits family, okay? Squash, watermelon, cucumbers, zucchini. And believe it or not, all those that I just named are the same species. Did anybody know that a yellow squash is the same species as a green zucchini? Is the same species as most of your typical jack-o'-lantern pumpkins? Is the same species as a patty pan squash? And you might be thinking, how in the world are they the same species? They're all Cucurbita pepo, P-E-P-O, and that is through selection. That division of how different those plants are from one another, you could essentially call them different cultivars or forms that have been selected for through years and years and years of breeding. That the majority of it happened naturally, right? And then I say we as humans create these cultivars, which we'll talk about in a minute. So monoecious plants are separate male and female flowers on the same plant. Also corn, think of corn. You have your tassels and you have your silks, right? Tassels and silks, male and female flowers on the same plant, okay? That can get a bit confusing. Another mechanism for plants that are generally cross-pollinated would be dioecious plants, plants that have a male plant and a female plant. A good example of that in the vegetable world is asparagus for people who grow asparagus. In some cases, there are other forms of self-incompatibility. So let's go back to this bloom right here. This is an apple bloom. This flower is perfect. It's what we call a perfect flower. It has male and female parts on there, right? So generally we would consider that self-pollinated, right? Well, it has some self-incompatibility features that are in place that prevent it from pollinating itself. That's why you have to have 2 cultivars of apple present, because they need that mixing of genetic material in order to set fruit. Isn't that interesting? So let's keep all these things in mind as we start talking about how we are making our plan for harvesting our seeds, okay? So before we get there, let's talk about some possibilities for natural cross-pollination and some examples that we can put out there for that. If you have 2 types of squash, like I mentioned before, say you have a crookneck squash and a straight neck squash, it is possible that the resultant seeds that form from a fruit that's developed on one of those plants will have traits of both parents. Okay, I think I have a little, well, that'll be on the next slide. It could have traits of both parents if those blooms were cross-pollinated, right? And they're monoecious, so they are naturally plants that should be cross-pollinated. So if we're planning on saving seed from plants that are in the cucurbits family, we're going to have to control pollination of those plants. And what we see right here is where they have pollinated a bloom themselves, and then they've closed the bloom up to prevent other insects from getting in there and bringing pollen from another cultivar or another variety in to contaminate that bloom. Does that make sense? So if you're growing more than 1 cultivar of squash, or really of cucurbits at all, you're going to need to do some controlled pollination, okay? And you may say, well, how do you do that? What are some ways around this? So there are a few ways we can do that. We could select individual plants for seed collection out of our garden, and you could cover those particular plants to prevent insects from getting in and causing cross-pollination. So usually people construct these mesh kind of cages that go over the plants. That's one option. And then to achieve self-pollination, you would have to go in with your hand and for example, shake the plant like a tomato. Like I said, it's self-pollinated, right? Doesn't need an insect or anything else. You could just stick your hand in there and shake it and it'll pollinate itself. But you would have to keep that secluded so that other things from the environment can't get in there and contaminate that with pollen from different cultivars of different tomatoes that are in the nearby area. Does that make sense? Okay, for monoecious plants like the squash that we're looking at, you would have to pluck a male flower and pull the petals back, and you would have to go and rub the pollen from that flower on the stigma of another flower, and then close the flower up, just like we see in this picture right here, okay? So it's important to understand whether the plants we're trying to collect seed from are self-pollinated or cross-pollinated and what part of the game that plays, okay? All right, so now let's look at what we can say from a different angle. So we talked about pollination. Let's talk about breeding for a minute. So the difference in hybrids and plants that we call open pollinated, in the end, it all comes down to the control of the pollen source, which is what we've been talking about, right? And whether it happened on its own or whether a human intentionally crossed those, right? So let's look at this picture over here on the right. We have two parent plants up here. One has violet flowers, one has white flowers. If we intentionally, as humans, we intentionally control the pollen cross of those two parent plants and we harvest the seed that is created from that, that is what we call an F1 generation plant. Have you ever bought seeds online or at this, usually you'll buy them online and it'll say like F1 hybrid, right? Or have you ever bought, a tomato that says on the tag, this is an F1 hybrid. F1 hybrids that are produced from two different parent plants are usually very vigorous. That's what they maintain, what we call hybrid vigor, and they're all similar to one another. They're brothers and sisters. All the other seeds that came out of that same fruit are similar, and so they maintain lightness and they maintain hybrid vigor. However, if we saved the seeds from that creation, we saved seeds from F1 generation, and we try to germinate them further, right? We harvest the fruit, we take the seeds out, try to germinate them. That creates what's called an F2 generation. And in the F2 generation, you have the possibility of those seeds maturing into any variety or any mix, really, of the two parents that we started with, okay? So you could have some that were violet, you could have some that were white, you could have some that were short or some that were tall, or any combination thereof. So you lose vigor and you also lose similarity. And that is what we call not true to type, okay? So if you are ordering seeds that you love and growing these plants that are hybrids that have this wonderful hybrid vigor and perform well in your garden, know that if you save the seeds to F1 hybrids, you are not going to get the plants that you desire from saving their seeds. Does that make sense? The only way to continue to get seeds for an F1 hybrid is going to be to order them from the person who bred them, essentially, okay? So I just wanted you to understand the business of true to type and how that relates back to hybrids, okay? Again, hybrids, humans are controlling the pollination of that plant. Now let's talk about an open pollinated plant for a minute. Open pollinated plants just basically refers to seed that's produced without control of the pollen source, okay? Now, open pollinated cultivars will usually produce the same offspring that are very, very close to the parent plants, provided the parents were kept separate from other varieties, okay? So when we buy heirloom plants, really the only thing that heirloom means is that they've been around for 50 years or more. There are really no regulations on the term heirloom. So if you buy an heirloom seed, that's not guaranteeing you anything except for the oldness, how long that particular variety has been around, okay? But typically, heirlooms are open pollinated. And so you can see how they have very high genetic diversity, and they've maintained the ability to create offspring that are the same, without controlled pollination. Now, if you grew, let's think of something that's open pollinated. Think of, what is an heirloom variety of tomato? Somebody?
Brandywine.
Brandywine. Okay, so you have a Brandywine tomato, you're growing it out there, you love it, that's great. You don't intentionally cover that plant that you want to save seed from. There's a potential that pollen from any other variety, we'll just say Jetstar, for example. There's potential that an insect gets pollen from a Jetstar and comes over to your Brandywine and pollinates one of those fruits. And if that's the fruit that you choose to harvest to save seed from, you have introduced an alternative pollen source, and your seeds are less likely to maintain the characteristics of Brandywine that you value. Does that make sense? So even with open pollinated things, we still need to be cognizant of the other cultivars that are being grown around it, okay? All right. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about how much do we save, right? How much seed do we need to save? And in all of the seed saving books, you know, as a rule of thumb, the more seed that you can save within one particular cultivar, the better, because you're maintaining genetic diversity within that population. If you just pick one little plant to save seeds from, and you don't mix it with the rest of your plant population, you are drastically reducing the diversity that is within that seed genome. Does that make sense? And if you do that year after year after year after year, you are going to lose some of the vigor of that plant. And that is actually, there's a term for it. It's called inbreeding depression. So if you are saving seeds year after year and you start to see that they are not performing as well as they did in the past, they are not germinating as well as they did, they're not yielding as well as they used to, you may be experiencing some of that inbreeding depression. But there are ways that we can reintroduce diversity to those seed populations. We'll talk about that here in a minute. So generally speaking, we want to save seeds from as many different plants as possible within that one particular cultivar. And there are a few exceptions. So self-pollinated plants like garden beans, they already have a narrower genetic diversity because they're self-pollinated. That's how they've maintained their particular cultivar this long. They're self-pollinated, right? Beans, peas, really any of those legumes would fall into this category. So in those types of plants, you could harvest from just a few pods or even just one plant and not affect the vigor of that seed line very much. Does that make sense? Okay. And then a few cautions that I wanted to put out there. We want to reduce selfing among outbred plants. And what I mean by selfing is, say that you have a squash and you are handling the pollination of that. Selfing would be taking a male flower from plant one and pollinating a female flower on plant one. That's selfing. It's pollinating itself. Does that make sense? Like you took the pollen and put it on there. So we want to prevent selfing to promote diversity. These types of plants are supposed to be cross-pollinated by nature, by insects, squash bees. There's a specific bee that helps with pollination of cucurbits. So what we want to do if we are controlling pollination for seed saving is to take male flowers from plant 1 and pollinate female flowers from plant 2, right? And then you close up that flower on plant 2, and when that fruit develops, you're going to harvest it, right? But you want to do that several times because we want to have great genetic diversity. So then we'll take a male flower from plant 2 and we'll pollinate a female flower from plant 3. Does that make sense? So on and so forth. So we are preventing selfing. We want to stay away from that so that we maintain genetic diversity and vigor. And some books. I know by now you're all like, I need a book. I need some reference. And so we have it. Miss Patricia Lewis gave me this book when she started Master Gardener. She said, oh, I think you're going to love this book, and I really have enjoyed it. I have gone through it so much that the bindings are flattened out, and it's great. It's called Seed to Seed, Seed Saving and Growing Techniques for Vegetable Gardeners by Suzanne Ashworth. Has anybody ever seen this book or had this book? I thought maybe a few people might. Now, while this is a wonderful book, and I still encourage you to get it because I use it as a reference all the time, there is a updated, more modern version of this book called The Seed Garden. And The Seed Garden, The Art and Practice of Seed Saving. And it has won the American Horticulture Society Book Award and is a revision with many additions to the original Seed to Seed, okay? And I asked for this book for Christmas, so I don't have it yet, but I did text it to my husband. So maybe, you know, I'm usually just getting random stuff that I've never heard of for Christmas, so maybe I'll get something I would like and need, so that'd be great. Okay, I feel like I've talked too long, but I have more slides. So do we want to talk for like 10 more minutes or do we want a seed swap? 10 more minutes. Okay, good. Hoped you'd say that. Okay, so let's move on. So I put together this neat little diagram, and I know it looks weird now, but it's important that we understand a few things about humidity before we talk about ideal conditions for storing seed, okay? So for a minute, let's talk about absolute humidity. Okay, so absolute humidity is the measure of water vapor or moisture that's in the air, regardless of what temperature it is. So warmer air holds more water than colder air does, okay? So I'm going to show us a pretty good example here. And this is going to really set the stage for helping to explain relative humidity. So say that we have on the right here a container that will hold 30 grams of water. And then on the right, we have a container that holds 5 grams of water. It could, that's its total capacity. So the container on the left, say we fill it 50%. If we fill that 50% with water, that's 15 grams of water. So this, you could think of this as 50% relative humidity, okay? If we filled it all the way up to 30, that would be 100% absolute, right? But we filled it half the way here. So we're at relative humidity, 50%. Now the next step we do is to fill this smaller container, say that we fill it 75% of the way up. Now we could say that this actually has 75% humidity, right? Relative humidity, but it has much less water overall in the container. So this is a perfect example for explaining how there can be different levels of humidity in different seasons. So like I said, warmer air holds more water. If I say that we have 50% humidity in summer, there are 15 grams of moisture in the air, as compared to saying we have a 75% relative humidity in winter, but there's only 3.75 grams of moisture in the air. Does that make, do you understand what I'm saying? So relative humidity, which is what they report in the news, is kind of misleading, because the relative humidity could be higher in the winter, but you actually have less moisture in the air. Does that make sense? Did I lose you? Okay, I feel like everybody is on the same page as far as humidity goes. And so that was a long way. That was kind of a long way of, or a long explanation of demonstrating that our high humidity here in Tennessee, it could prevent seeds from drying out, right? When you read seeds about seed saving, they're always talking about reducing the dryness of the seed to 6 to 8%. Homeowners don't have a good way to measure the dryness of seed. We don't have a thing you can stick in there and measure. But just know it's going to be almost impossible for us to get seeds to 8% moisture levels, because our humidity is so high, especially in the summertime. So drying seeds would be more conducive for when? Cooler weather, right? So you might harvest the seed. The appropriate time to harvest that seed might be late summer, but let's let those seeds continue to dry out as our conditions become less and less humid. And this becomes more important when we talk about cold storage of seed. So we'll talk about that right now. So what are the different factors that affect seed viability when we are talking about storing seeds? So basically, oh, a piece of hair in my face. Basically, the conditions that are essential to good seed storage are the exact opposite of those that are required for good germination, right? So what do we need for germination? We need water, we need oxygen, and we need favorable temperatures, which are usually warmer temperatures. So we want everything opposite of that for seed storage. Good seed storage, we need to have seeds that are not only harvested dry, but allowed to dry down and kept dry. Below 8% moisture is ideal, and the temperature is kept low. Below 40 degrees is ideal for long-term storage, okay? But I don't store lots of seeds for long-term. The majority of my seeds I collect late summer, fall. I save them through the winter, and then what do you do with them? You plant them in the spring, right? So that would be what we consider open storage. I don't go through the hassle for those seeds of trying to get their percentages so low and storing them in airtight containers, which is important if you're entering them into cold storage. If I'm utilizing open storage, I'm just putting them in a cool, dry, dark place. And what's important for open storage of seeds that are being held for a short period of time, say 6 to 8 months, is consistency, okay? We don't want things fluctuating. You don't want it to be super sunny and then dark, and like, don't put them on a windowsill. Put them in a closet, right? And are you gonna put them high up or are you gonna put them down low? Probably down low, because heat rises. So we're just trying to find those environments that are most consistent for short-term storage, which is referred to as open storage. Now, if you look in even educational materials, you're going to see lots of controversy information about whether you should or should not store seeds in refrigerators and freezers. And I'm just going to go ahead and say I've done it, and I haven't seen like awful results. So I'm just saying I'm going to leave this up to you to experiment with. But different sources say different things, and there's a reason. It's because like you'll see some extension publications, I read at least 3 that specifically told homeowners not to put seeds in the freezer. However, how are seeds maintained for long term in our national seed bank. They're frozen cryogenically, but the difference is those seeds are dry. They are putting seeds in freezing temperature conditions that are at the perfect dryness, okay? If we put seeds in our freezers that aren't adequately dried, you're gonna have cracking and death of those seeds, essentially. They won't be viable. So there are a few things that we can do to check for dryness. It's not always exactly accurate, but it's the closest thing we have. It's called the bend versus snap test for dryness. So think of like a pumpkin seed. And say that you bend it, okay? If you bend it and it snaps clean, that's a sign that it's probably dry enough to go into cold storage. If it doesn't snap, if it just bends and kind of creases, you know what I'm talking about? The seed coat kind of creases up, that's a good sign that it's not dry enough, okay? The smash test, or I guess it's, I don't know another word to call it. Say you took a kernel of corn and you smashed it. If it just smushed out, it's not dry enough. If it shatters into lots of little bitty pieces, it's dry. Does that make sense? If it smushes and it's smushy, it's not dry. If it shatters, it is dry, okay? So those are some things that we can use to help us decide if we've dried seeds down far enough to put them into cold storage. A few other things to keep in mind is that, like we said, humidity is important, and that plays a role. We've dried the seed down. Now we need to make sure that we don't have moisture that's reintroduced to that seed. So if we're putting things in cold storage, they must go into airtight containers, okay? Like airtight, like if you put it in water, would water get in it? And if it won't, that's considered airtight, okay? So putting seeds in the freezer need to be airtight. Even with refrigerators, that's important. Refrigerator has, an ideal temperature, but it generally has a much higher humidity. And every time we open the door, that introduces, fluctuating temperatures. So if you have like an extra refrigerator that you don't use that much, that would be even better for cold seed storage than a refrigerator that you're opening every day to get the creamer and the milk and everything else that you need out. Does that make sense? Okay, so there's conflicting information, but they're doing it to protect you. So the extension publication says not to do it, but that's just because they know that there's a possibility that you may not get those seeds dry enough. Then we talk about longevity, and longevity of seeds can depend on a lot of different things. The storage conditions, like we talked about. If you're going to have super long-term storage, it definitely needs to be a cold storage, okay? If you're storing things for more than a year or two, cold storage is best, and it's going to increase longevity of that seed. The initial quality of the seed when you harvested it, obviously, the species, some species of plants have longer holding qualities than others, and also the size. So who would have thought that? But larger seeds have longer saving times, okay? Here are a few examples of seeds that might be considered long-lived, over 5 years. Calendula, or calendula, depending on your accent, nasturtium, poppies, zinnias, carrots, cucurbits. All those cucurbits tend to have a long life, tomatoes, and even lettuce. But short-lived plants, where their seeds only retain good viability, and we're talking about above 75% germination for a year or two, are things like asters, petunias, marigolds, salvias, vinca, okra. That's weird. That wouldn't have been on my list, but okra, onions, peppers. Those are all seeds that have very short shelf lives. And then there's a term called hard seed, and this is when the seed has been overly dried, so below 6% dryness, and we refer to those as hard seeds. So they've become so dry that they're hydrophobic, and when you take them out of cold storage and reintroduce them to moisture, they have trouble accepting that moisture into their system, and you'll have spotty germination. So hard seed that's been dried down too low is really no better than seed that has poor germination, right? So either which way you look at it, could be a negative. Okay, real quickly, I'm going to talk about the collection process for dry seeds and then wet seeds, and then we'll do our seed swap, okay? So, and I say this, that the dry process, the dry seed pod process is relatively straightforward. I feel like that's the one most people do most often. We're familiar with it. I like to use, I've got some of the stuff up here. I use paper bags, these paper manila envelopes, these mesh little sacks that I like to pop over the seed pods, which allow those pods to continue to mature. And I don't have to be so nervous about the seed being released when I'm not out there, when it finally gets mature enough to be harvested. So I do love those little mesh bags for that. But definitely we want to make sure that those pods reach maturity and dryness. So this is a cleome, and I saw some folks have brought some spider plant seeds, yay. But these pods here are not ready to be harvested. You can see they're still green, okay? So if they're fleshy and green, that's a sign that they're not ready. Here's a great picture of an Asclepias seed pod. You can see how dry and browned out that pod has gotten, and it's actually gone ahead and popped open to expose the seeds inside. So that would be a good sign that that pod has matured enough for you to remove it from the plant. And then of course, we could go on and on showing lots of different examples of plants that have different types of seed heads, and that's exactly what we do in that other seed harvesting discussion. So if you're interested in that, be sure to check it out. But the collection process can be a little different when we're dealing with wet fruits, okay, or things that have pulp or flesh involved with them. So it's essentially a three-step process. We need to, there's the seed removal, seed cleaning, and then drying. So a few more steps involved. When we harvest dry seeds, we just take them off the pods, we bring them in. Sometimes you have to thrash them to get the chaff off, and then sometimes you have to winnow them, kind of blow across of them to get that chaff separated from the seed. But a few more steps here with the wetness. So this is a passion fruit, and I did this process and brought some seeds. So if y'all would like to have some of these seeds, they're in the room over there. But I did this specifically to be able to share it with folks in the future. So the time to harvest this fruit is not when it's firm, but it's when it's begun to get like kind of mushy, you know what I mean? But it's still hanging on the vine. You don't want it to fall on the ground, so it can be a close call, right? If it falls on the ground, then we have like funguses and molds that start to develop. So we want to get it while it's still on the vine, but has already become nice and ripe. And a common name for this is the maypop. So if you just squeeze it hard enough, it just pops open, and it has these little seeds on the inside. And the only way I can describe them is that they're similar or reminiscent to like a pomegranate. So all these seeds are held in these little bitty capsules, I guess, of like flesh and juice. And so the first step here is to try to get all those popped. We've got to separate that from the seed itself. So I just kind of used my fingers and squashed them all around. I rubbed them around on the paper, trying to get all those little packets popped. And then this is what we end up with. This kind of mushy mess that's in my hand. And then you want to put them into water, and you don't want to put an airtight lid on it. You want it to be able to breathe. But this is a process called fermenting or fermentation. Not all fleshy seeds require this, but some of them do. So if you've been harvesting seed from fleshy type fruits and have been having low germination, it might be because you're skipping a necessary fermentation process. to remove all of that junk and mess off the seed. This also kills, that fermentation kills microorganisms and other bacterias and yeast even that could hang around on those seeds and redevelop later. And that could be what's hurting your germination process. Tomatoes generally like fermentation. Peppers don't require fermentation. So, I mean, you really have to do your research on it to know which ones are going to require those and which ones aren't. So let it be in the water for a few days and then just continue. I kind of swirl it around, drain off the nasty water, fill it up with clean water, and do this over and over again until you have nice, pretty, clean seed. You also want to skim off any of the seeds that float to the top because those are not, those seeds aren't strong. They'll be less vigorous. And then make sure you get them dried really well. And then you're finally ready to store those long term. And last slide with information on it, I promise, is overcoming dormancy. I get lots of questions on this, and I feel like I could probably do a whole class on just overcoming dormancy. So I'm just going to introduce you to some concepts about it, but know that we can go into it more later. And I also have made some handouts. So if you want to get a handout about this overcoming dormancy, be sure to grab one before you leave. But there are two types of dormancy. There's external dormancy, and then there's what we call endodormancy. External dormancy are things like a hard seed coat, right, that requires scarification or scratching of the seed to allow it to germinate more easily, soaking in water to soften that outer coat. Those are things that we call, that fall into the external dormancy category. Endodormancy could be a number of things. It could be temperature. It could be the presence of moisture. It could be a cold period followed by a warm period followed by a cold period, or vice versa. It could be any combination of those. It can even be light exposure. Some seeds have to have light to germinate. Some seeds have to have darkness to germinate. And those are all conditions of endodormancy. And so you see how this could be a fun talk to kind of get our brains thinking about all the different specific requirements that seeds can have. But those are the two basic ones. I couldn't find a all-inclusive comprehensive list of plants that required cold stratification, but I put one together from sources that I found, research-based sources, and then also seeds that I've grown myself, and I have the seed packets, and it specifically tells on there what those dormancy requirements are. So if you would like to pick that up, it's down here. It's a yellow sheet of paper. And I guess I need to explain that real quick before I wrap things up. So when I said some seeds require a period of cold, that's called stratification. So hurting the seed coat is scarification, scarification. Cold period is stratification. And it's not only cold, most of the time it's a cold with moisture. Okay, so just putting seed in the refrigerator in their packet while they're dry isn't good enough. Okay, you've not achieved stratification by just putting a pack of seed in the refrigerator. They need to be in moistened media and then put in an airtight container and then put in the refrigerator, because that is replicating the conditions that the seed would have encountered in the environment anyway, right? So for these types of seeds, you would need to do this stratification process if you've ordered seed or if you've saved seed and are intending on germinating those the following spring. You have some other options, okay? You could just direct seed them in the fall and let Mother Nature take care of it. Because she would do that. She would provide the moisture and the cold temperatures, and all of those requirements would be met naturally. But if we're trying to force those and do them ourselves, it's important to know how to do that. Also, if the stratification period is less than 30 days and the temperature requirements are not below 40 degrees, sometimes you can wait until early spring to direct seed those outdoors, and you wouldn't have to manually stratify them either. Okay, so make sure you pick up the little handout up here. And I'm gonna leave y'all with saying we had so much fun with our intern training class this fall. This is our last session. We came out to the research center and collected seed and took propagation samples because that was our last fun propagation class. And I said trick or treat because everybody had their bags and I was putting seeds in everybody's bags. Like, trick or treat, trick or treat. And this was us out in the garden just having a good time and harvesting some moonflower seeds. Thought that was cool. Okay, and that's all we have. And so I'll leave you. Oh, thank you. I feel like I talked really fast, but I kept all a good long while. So yeah, so everybody, I'm gonna wish y'all a happy Thanksgiving and a Merry Christmas, but I will be in contact with you. That doesn't mean that you're not gonna be hearing from me. So I'll still be communicating via email. Don't forget to get your hours entered into the database. I put some little videos on Facebook about refreshers on how to do that in case you needed them. And you can always call me if you need help. And other than that, I say go have fun seed and plant swapping.